So on our panel tonight is, from I guess left to right, is Ben Curry from Summit 7 Systems. Hola. Jeff Farosky with Jornada/Blue Metal. Jeremy Thake from Microsoft. Todd Clint from Rackspace. And Reuven Gatz from Canada. Thank you, Reuven. Thank you all. And moderating tonight's panel is going to be SharePoint MVP. You know him, you love him. Andrew Connell, and he's going to lead the discussion. Andrew?
Thank you very much, Dave. Come over, Dave. Oh, come on. Everybody enjoying the show so far? Absolute fantastic show. Yeah, it's always, love SPTechCon. Always fun to come to Boston. So this panel is kind of like built off of a keynote that we had at SPTechCon in San Francisco, or some of the concept was from it, talking about kind of like how to approach Office 365 and how you can look at it, how you could adopt it. Does it mean something to you? Does it apply to you? Should it apply to you? Is it something you should look at? Should you be jumping on board? Those kinds of things. Just looking at it from a bit of a pragmatic approach. So it's a moderated panel, so that means that there's a bit of audience interaction here about having questions that any questions you may have for people on our panel. A lot of cross-section of a lot of different experience up here. And none of these people are type A's or have strong personalities or opinions. So you have to get some really good questions and some probing stuff to find out what their thoughts are. So I guess before we get started, or I guess to get started here, does anybody have a question, an Office 365 question, like adoption question that's burning that you want to ask?
Hi, I'm Kat Weichsel. I am currently a 2010 on-premise user, and I use DocAv actually for backup and restore, and I use it a lot of times to move content from one site collection to another for users to change their mind on location of where stuff should be. We are hoping and planning to move completely to Office 365 next year, not a hybrid, but full-on Office 365. And so one of my concerns is giving up that ability. And is there any option for, once you move and you're in an Office 365 environment, for stuff like that? Obviously, we won't have DocAv anymore, where we would have access to be moving stuff around. Anything that we could do to move content? Like, what kind of access will we have?
So I guess I should go through a little bit of logistics stuff here too before we jump into that. If anybody has a specific one you want to jump in with, just kind of raise your hands. Like, okay, well, we got a couple that are coming. And then for you guys that are out here as well, while they're giving an answer here, if you have a question, raise your hand so that I can run over, or somebody with a microphone can run over. We make sure that we get them, get everything where everybody can hear it. There's also a mic over here in the middle. So I guess let's start over here with Ben Curry.
There is AppPoint in the cloud, so we've successfully moved stuff around in the cloud. So you still have AppPoint functionality. It's fairly easy to transfer your licensing over as well with AppPoint. There are more limitations in the cloud. I don't know that it's been AppPoint problems we face as much as it's been we don't have access to things like resource throttling, like 5,000 items in a list and so forth. So some things we used to do on premise just don't work as well in Office 365. But as far as the tool set, AppPoint's actually still a good play. There's a lot of vendors in that space now. It's really, in my opinion, it may not be popular with my partners, but really becoming more of a commodity. Metalogix, AppPoint, Dell software. There's several in that space now.
ShareGate.
I concur.
Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind, obviously, if you move into the cloud, you don't have access to the servers, but the client-side interfaces are so much better than they were one version ago, 2 versions ago. So while you can't shuffle things around in the back end like you're used to, all these tools like we've talked about allow you to do it from the front end. Probably not going to be as efficient because it's coming down and it's going back up. Another thing to keep in mind is, now I'm going to sound like a company shill here. I work for a hosting company. I work for Rackspace. So another option, depending on what your motivation is for getting stuff off premises and off into somebody else's data center, something like a hosted solution might give you what you want. And so you could potentially, with Rackspace or any number of other hosters, have an on-premises version of SharePoint, but hosted in somebody else's data center. So you don't have to worry about all the upkeep and all that. And then part of that is you have access to the back end. So you can keep using all the tools that you used on premises, but you don't have to worry about keeping it running. So when we talk about the whole on premises in the cloud, it's not a binary thing. There's a lot of little areas. So when you're making that decision, kind of see what else is out there.
Anything else to add by the other guys?
Well covered.
Well covered.
Yeah, he concurs.
Cool. Very good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
The biggest fear that we have, we already a small institute, part of a big IT. How to convince the big IT to adopt the online solution, because it's actually more productive for us, and we don't have to worry about the back ends, But we can't have two sets of ADs and two sets of users and all that, and that's the biggest. But the biggest fear for them is security, and obviously, how can we go about convincing the big IT to facilitate, use of the one Active Directory, not two, which is actually the biggest block, for user adaptation.
Todd again?
Thanks for asking all these questions that I know the answers to. So once again, there's a lot of different options out there. If we're talking about Office 365, there's the soft problems and the hard problems, the technical problems and the political problems. So to answer your Active Directory question, if you're doing Office 365 and all that, there is options for federation, there's options for dir sync type things, so you can absolutely have single sign-on or same sign-on, depending on what works for you, and that absolutely works with all the SharePoint Online stuff. So you absolutely can have an experience where the user logs into their workstation at work, and it's the same login that they have to something in the cloud. That absolutely works. To address the soft stuff, so the technical stuff is probably already out there. To address the soft stuff, the security things, you really just have to sit down and have a conversation with them and say, what is your fear? What are you worried about? And then just kind of go see what the solutions to that are. Part of it, I'm an old school IT guy. I like having a server in there that I can hit on the side when it's acting up. Some of that is just, you're gonna have to work on them, but technically there's solutions.
Ruben, you have something to add?
What I'm seeing from our clients, and there's been a big change over the last year, 18 months, 2 years, is that those concerns that IT raised looking at the cloud have been so overwhelmed by the cost implications of moving that management tells IT, figure this out, make it work, check that it's secure, and cost overwhelms everything. Some of our most conservative, old-style, stodgy financial services companies, it just makes sense financially, and the shareholders care about financial, and so the move is happening, whether IT likes it or not.
That's definitely a good perspective on it. Ben, did you have something you were going to add, or no, you didn't have something. Now you do have something you're going to add. We go back and forth.
I will add something to it. I think Todd, they're exactly right. Management's pushing to override some of the security concerns. With Office 365, we have 4 authentication methods. One is to synchronize our directory with the Azure Active Directory. The second is to synchronize our directory, including the password hash. And part of the things you can just tell your security people is we're not actually synchronizing the password to the cloud, we're only synchronizing the hash. As Ruben said, the way we overwrite, security guys never like that. The fact that we're synchronizing our hash to Azure AD, they're like, oh, heck no. But I think the business can override that. I think he's exactly right. The third way we can still do ADFS, so we still go to the cloud. And then third, we can do third-party federated sign-on, like Ping or Sibboleth. So we have multiple ways to get single sign-on or synchronize. Oh, actually the 5th way, you'd actually could still have a cloud-only identity, as you alluded to in the very beginning. And we rarely use a cloud-only identity unless we're just maybe a point solution, like an extranet. We just want to dip our toe in Office 365. Okay, maybe we create a really small AD just in Office 365 and Azure just to do an extranet for like a test case. So those are the 5 ways you can authenticate with Office 365.
Oh, biggest fear is HIPAA compliance.
Someone can, the HIPAA compliance is the biggest fear that they have, and if there's any way that they can come out and totally divulge their whatever facts and figures they have, that yes, it is totally HIPAA compliance. I think that would ease up some of the headaches and roadblocks that we have.
It really depends on how you guys read your HIPAA guidelines, legislation. So it really is up to your own IT security and how they read that. If their paranoia on a 1 to 10 scale is 10, yeah, you're kind of screwed, honestly. But if
It's a technical term.
Even for on-premise.
Even for on-premise, it's true, right? I mean, it's true, right? So it really is a compromise of what it costs. It's cost versus security, and it's a balancing act. It really is. If you're a government agency, you can get you're guaranteed onshore. So a lot of your HIPAA concerns can go away there. At least you know you're not offshoring. But as far as HIPAA compliance, are you worried about PII within your AD? Is that your issue?
Yes, and we don't want the same thing, the same experience that Apple had, with the iCloud. I mean, if there are fears like that, that somehow it is in the Microsoft technology, what if? Can anyone, address that this is secure?
There are Office 365. Microsoft just released DLP within Office 365 for SharePoint. So you have data loss prevention, and you can actually look up those records like a social security number. So any PI information you might have around HIPAA, most of those concerns should be solved now within the platform. If PII is in your Active Directory itself as a property, I think that's a completely different issue. It's not really a 365 issue. That's really an identity management issue.
Right. And from a Microsoft perspective, I'm not an expert in compliance by any means, but some of my colleagues who sit in the same building are actively working on, we just looked it up, the Office 365 Trust Center. They've had a lot of success with the larger customers that do have those fears. So where they've had security guys that are concerned or compliance officers that are concerned, by pointing those guys to that Trust Center, all of that content is in their language, and there's a lot of content that explains exactly what there is now from a compliance perspective and what that roadmap is looking at. And all I can really kind of allude to is that there is a significant amount of effort going into making sure that from a compliance perspective, we continue to keep adding those different compliance acts. And there's been some that obviously they're introducing, I think it was 5 this year already, that we're actually targeting. And from an on-premises perspective, I doubt your security guys are even compliant to those 5. So some of the argument is that the fear of it being in the cloud may, if you pointed the argument back at the guys that are running on-prem, they might not be as compliant as they think they are compared to what we measure. And that Trust Center messaging is a little bit like that. And again, that's about as far as I can go around compliance, but I would highly recommend checking out that Trust Center.
Yeah, I think there's a common thing that you keep hearing around the compliance thing with the HIPAA stuff or with any of the other certifications that are out there, where is not to dismiss it, but I think we hear the common quote is about something that if you think that it's more secure on-prem than it is in the cloud, then there's like a fallacy there, or not. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's more secure just because it's on-prem, because I think there's an argument that a lot of people make about you have more. It's a bigger thing for Microsoft or a cloud provider to get hacked with a bunch of customer data that's in it than it is for just the one customer to get hacked. And so it's like they have more on the line than we do individually as customers, is a common thing that I hear from it. Ruben, you had something to add, or?
Well, you said you weren't going to answer questions, you were just going to moderate. So you said... I was going to say exactly the same thing. Without addressing your particular HIPAA thing, some of the biggest issues or things that are raised are uptime and security, right? It's out of my control now, right? I don't get to kick the server, and that's worrisome. But to repeat, Andrew, your security team, I put them up against Microsoft, right? These guys are defending millions of clients and giant farms, and the uptime issue, it becomes extremely public when Amazon or Microsoft or Google, when they go down, it's like front page news, and so everybody hears about it. But how often does your site go down? More often than that, right? Your email outage is bigger than those, except for some very rare, and I'm say rare because they must be, but I haven't heard of any, that are better. So, you know, it seems like it's out of your control, so it's worrisome about it going down in security, but you're really pitting your own team of great guys against Olympic caliber guys, right? And girls.
I think Ruben's insight was absolutely brilliant right there, personally.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that most on-premise installations are probably more vulnerable to attack and hacking than Office 365 will ever be.
This is more along the same lines. So what does 365 do for encryption at rest and you know, protection in general?
One of the best things about Office 365 is that they install information rights management for you. You don't have to build out the entire infrastructure, and you can control people's ability to email, print, you know, download, all from rights management. And if you've ever tried to do rights management on premise, it's kind of like pulling your fingernails out with a pair of pliers. It's pretty painful, right? And in 365, it's just magic. That's actually, for me, a huge selling point of Office 365.
Yeah, also, data at rest, too, is also, it's spread out between data centers. So not all your information lives on one machine in one data center. It's actually spread out. So if anybody were to compromise one of the Office 365 servers, they just get a small piece of a bunch of customers' data. They wouldn't get everything at once.
Yeah.
Todd?
And I'm not sure if it's active yet, but at the last SharePoint conference, I think, Bill Baird did a talk on how they're handling this encryption at rest. And to build on on top of what Jeff talked about, in SharePoint 2013, documents, when they get uploaded, they get shredded, this whole shredded storage thing. So not only is it, you can't just grab a chunk of data and have whole documents, you've got these shreds of documents, but those shreds can be encrypted. So now you've got encrypted pieces of a document, and they're encrypted with different keys. So now you've got different pieces of different documents encrypted with different keys, and it's spread geographically. It's pretty crazy stuff. I'm not sure if that's in place now or if that was a forward-looking thing. But it was like something out of a sci-fi magazine was explaining where all these pieces were at and all these things. And it said something about there were only 10 people at Microsoft that had access to all of it, and they were working to get that down to 0, so that no one person anywhere had keys to every place to get to rebuild that stuff.
Encryption, and that's right, encryption at rest isn't our big security threat. Here's the threat. I call your administrative assistant. Hi, this is George with Microsoft. We're having issues with your Office 365 domain. And can you give me your username or password, please? And let me just do some troubleshooting. I mean, what we're seeing, social hacking is still the #1 hacking mechanism, whether it's your infrastructure, whether it's the cloud, whether it's Star Trek. It's the same problem.
You do this often?
Yes.
I just talked to George at Microsoft. I'm scared now. Anybody else? Back to the left. Oh, wow, here, all the hands came up at once.
Microsoft offers a lot of protection against deleted documents, accidentally or maliciously or whatever, by getting them out of the trash and that. But there's other kinds of destruction that can occur, like somebody accidentally changing the schema of a list, and you could only get that from a backup. And Microsoft has said, well, we're not going to restore anything. So what do you feel about the need for backup in Office 365, and how, like, what % of customers do you see doing that, purchasing a product to do backup?
Someone,
Well, 73% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
I can make
I
up
thought
some
it was
statistics.
67%.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I can talk a little bit. And so prior to joining Microsoft 6 months ago, I actually worked at AvePoint. So Ben had already mentioned those. And I can talk to kind of the other products being in a similar appearance there. There are SLAs in place for backup and recovery when you lose data. But obviously when you restore it through our service in Office 365, it's an all or nothing. So I can restore various different scopes, but it's going to be wiping out anything that you lost from that time. What a lot of these vendors now who support Office 365 are doing are allowing you to do granular backup of content and granular restore of that content. So for instance, you might have a snapshot every hour or every day of particular libraries and lists. Some of those vendors out there will support in your example there of capturing that list schema so that you could re-push back the content types or re-push back those list instance configurations from that granular level. And that's just not something that the Office 365 service has right now, and probably won't prioritize because the vendors are doing such a good job of kind of filling that space. And to be honest, a lot of these vendors started in the SharePoint world because they have products in backup and restore as well. So you'll get a level of backup SLA through the service as a baseline. But if you want that level, if you're not going to just use a recycle bin in a library at a document level, but you want something a little bit higher up like site settings and list configuration, you will require a product that's available. And I'm sure the expo hall tomorrow, they'll all be happy to talk to you about their products.
If you screw up a content type, there's no Control Z.
Yeah. Did anyone from the SI want to add to that? No?
I think you did a good job, Jeremy.
It was very politically correct. I'm still learning.
So this is to continue one of the questions from earlier about availability. So we've had a number of recent discussions with certain teams about the availability of documents or lists for business critical processes. Business is certainly important about it, but you'd be surprised how much technology users are even more passionate about it. Would you ever, in either an on-prem or a cloud-based scenario, state that SharePoint is an appropriate place for business critical storage? And if not, what would you recommend?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I would say SharePoint is an appropriate place for all of your business critical information except how to recover SharePoint. That should probably be someplace else.
And your resume.
Everything else, I think, is probably well handled in SharePoint. And again, it has to do with how good your people are. As long as they can keep the thing running and all that, yeah, absolutely. That's our bread and butter, except for the recovery piece for SharePoint.
I agree.
And your resume. Don't keep your resume in SharePoint.
And I think to just add to that from a functionality perspective, and you'll see some of this in the keynote tomorrow morning, but there's a massive drive from Office 365 to really push that collaboration when documents are stored inside OneDrive for Business or SharePoint. Naturally, yep, there are file servers and there is file shares that you can run, which are obviously lighter, and you may be able to guarantee a better SLA, but I think it comes back down to that security thing as well. It's like, how good are your IT guys on-prem? Whether, with SharePoint, the high availability concerns of SharePoint server is more complicated from a high availability, and Todd can certainly talk to that a lot better than I can. But I think what you're going to see is that as the business users start seeing those compelling scenarios of how easy it is to open this document up and share it and collaborate and co-author, that you can only do inside OneDrive for Business and SharePoint. If you push your users down the path to sit that document on a file share, you're going to really be fighting against your business in terms of what they want to do, and you'll probably find that they'll go around you and they'll start storing their documents where they do have that better productivity story. Someone else.
I'd add one thing to everything they said, plus when we talk about business critical documents, there's some really simple solutions to increase our SLA without spending $1 million. Offline clients. You talked about, OneDrive is an option. Caligo is a fine option. We install Caligo at a lot of clients where we have business critical documents. So when the server's down, I still have my documents. I can still edit documents. When SharePoint comes back up and sees a network connection, it resyncs. I mean, I think sometimes we make it so complex that we're missing the really, really simple fixes to stuff. I had a client, a small Office 365 client, 50 seats, and they said they can't afford a Quest or Dell or an AvePoint, but we need offline backup. So what we did is on their server, we set up a Caligo client, we synced their 3 site collections, we have an offline backup of their 365. It syncs all the time. So, I think sometimes we're missing the really simple solutions to solve problems.
It's more about governance than it is about technical, right? There's solutions for these problems, but how do you define what is business critical? How do you make sure that you have access to it, just as Ben described? The question isn't SharePoint or not SharePoint, it's defining what business critical means and how you're going to meet that requirement.
Good question. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Let's get this fitness in. Make sure you got your Fitbit on, mate.
We have a grants management custom whatever in SQL Server, and we surface that reporting information in SharePoint through the report center and all of those data connections. If we move that to 365, would we have problems with that still being on-prem and in server? Our experience with 365 hasn't been good in the fact that we don't have this single sign-on, so trying to access documents and whatever from our on-prem, we have to authenticate. And so I worry about moving all of that to Office 365. Should we be concerned, or there are technical things that we can do to put into place?
I can cover a little bit of it, but go ahead.
All right, Jeremy?
So the business intelligence story inside Office 365 is getting a lot stronger. And the hybrid story, if you guys aren't following Bill Baer, who's in our team as well, I'd highly recommend making sure you check his blog at least once a week. And definitely get him on Twitter, because he's a bit more tongue-in-cheek on Twitter, and you usually catch things that you won't say in his blog. The scenario that you're talking about, it's like everything in SharePoint. It depends. But this one, if I pick a few of the main common scenarios that we see there, and again, with SharePoint being so huge, there's no way I'd allude to being an expert in BI, but there are some people who I don't see here, and you can't miss him because he's 6'4", who is doing a BI talk this week where he would definitely be able to ask in more detail. But essentially, SQL has very many authentication mechanisms. If you can share your data up so it's publicly available, obviously locked down by auth, that is the same as what Office 365 has, in certain scenarios you can pull that data up. There is work being done right now, because I've seen it running, to actually make that better. So there's more inputs directly to your on-premises, and that's leveraging a lot of the Azure mechanisms that are in place around authentication. It's not there yet, but it is really, and it depends depending on how your data's locked down. But John White would be the one to ask, and he's here because he was just in my room helping me with some Power BI stuff earlier on. So he's the guy.
Yeah, to second what Jeremy said, like a year and a half ago, so I was an on-prem guy for a while, and then the company I worked for got purchased by a hoster, so I all of a sudden got to be a big fan of the cloud. Hooray! But like a year and a half ago, when Microsoft, 2 years ago, when Microsoft really started pushing Office 365, and we would go into customers and we would, that would be the two things on the table. It was really easy for us to compete against Office 365. And as the months go by, things like the Power BI come out, some of the authentication, and it's getting tougher. We still have a good story, but they're filling in those gaps. And like you said, John White would be a great guy to bounce that BI question off of. And like Ben talked about earlier, for authentication, there's ways to make whatever you're trying to do work. It's especially when you start getting into federation, it gets complicated, but it's out there somewhere.
Well, I think if you look at Microsoft, even 18 months ago, I heard him at a conference and said, we'll never do Secure Store because we want to assume the risk of identities. Right. Guess what you got today? You got a Secure Store, you have BCS. So when I'm thinking on-premise data, it requires a modification of STS and the public certificate. It's not rocket science, but it's just some PowerShelling. But yeah, you have Secure Store and BCS. We can get that data in Office 365 without a lot of pain, honestly, if you know Secure Store and BCS.
Hi, I have just one question for you. My name is Paul. First of all, thank you guys for sharing your knowledge, because it's really helpful as we start to evaluate what's going on. But there are 6 of you here. Is it possible that you guys could share your personal views on what things in Office 365 are showstoppers for you? Because as we look at this product, and as we look at on-site versus here, please take your Microsoft hats off and give us the truth about some things that we're walking into that we're very afraid of.
Asking you guys for opinions. This is fun. Who wants to take this one on first?
So I've only been at Microsoft 6 months, and I'd quite like to be there for another 6 months. I did just relocate from New York to Seattle, and yeah, let's see what the others say, and I might just twizzle on some that I think I'll get away with saying without Julia White sending a laser through the ceiling and shooting me.
But after 12 months, he's gone.
She's a lovely lady as well. But she probably would shoot me with a laser.
Reuven, do you have one for that? Any showstoppers that come to your mind?
I'm going to give the consultant response. By the way, I was introduced as representing Canada. I'm not the Prime Minister of Canada.
You are? I'm not. Or the mayor?
I work for a consulting firm called Avanade, and when you asked the question, I thought, what are the showstoppers? There aren't showstoppers because we solve problems. You know, there's not just one way to solve any problem. But if pressed, I mean, hybrid is really complicated, and that causes pain. So that'll be my answer.
I'll be honest in that I don't know exactly what the new features are that have come in, but when we talk to folks about why they want to do, hosted on-prem kind of Rackspace stuff or Office 365, there always ends up being like little BI things or something you just can't get to work because it's just not on Office 365 yet. So it's all those little things. I will say though, I will go the other direction from Reuven. I have found that, like I said, 2 years ago, Microsoft was really pressing Office 365 and it was really easy to shoot down. And then I think the thing that's really going to move adoption forward is the hybrid stuff. It is complicated to get set up, but it allows people to start slowly moving things in. So like with Service Pack 1 with SharePoint 2013, you can move your My Sites off to SharePoint Online. So just a little bit, not the whole thing. You can keep it on-prem and you can do your BI stuff, but just the My Sites, and that's all. And then you can, you want to move your social stuff out to Yammer? Okay, you can do that, but it stays on. So that hybrid thing is making the story really fuzzy and it's making it really easy for people to try. So even if there are things that keep you stuck, you can go out.
I forgot one thing. I do have a showstopper, not being from the US. Data residency is a showstopper. There is no Microsoft farm in Canada, and there's certain government-connected or government agencies where they just cannot use it because it's not data resident in Canada.
And that's the traditional problem, or the cloud-wide problem that we have with everything, which is being able to guarantee where your data resides. You guys have showstoppers? I have one.
I'm feeling brave.
Oh, so we're just now cutting it down to just another 3 months.
Everyone put Twitter down. This one is very much so if you're an existing SharePoint customer where you've done customization. Now, this is my direct kind of responsibility at Microsoft right now is essentially making the story easier for you guys as you do that transformation from on-premises to the cloud. And essentially, if you've used a lot of full trust code, so if you've had developers building stuff in Visual Studio and you need to be able to move that over, there are things you're going to have to do to rewrite that code to make it so that you can move those customizations over. There's some great content, if you have done this, on dev.office.com. Underneath the transform page is one of the pages I own. There are tools available there for free where you can actually run your solution packages through it and get an analysis to see how much effort would be involved in making that transformation to the cloud. That is certainly something we're seeing with customers, and to the points that Reuven and Todd just made, customers are kind of, and I've just been talking about this over the weekend, the whole slowly catch your monkey approach of, well, what can we move? And okay, there might be these big boulders that we can't move just now, and let's plan accordingly on when we can rewrite those, or maybe we don't even need to rewrite them, and we can leave them on-prem maybe, or decommission them. But there's a lot of effort going on to kind of improve that transformation story, but it's just the notion of where we were 7 years ago when we built SharePoint and what developers could do with it then, which was just a single tenant, you do what you like with it, to now this being run as a multi-tenant service.
Jeff, did you have one?
No, everybody's pretty much taken my answers, but I was going to say, full trust code, custom solutions. Hello? Yeah. Full trust code, custom solutions, and also the BI story as well. It's coming along, and eventually they'll get there. But if you're relying heavily on BI and also custom solutions, then that's probably the biggest showstopper that I've come across. Otherwise, I haven't. Most things I've seen, it's been more political in organizations moving to Office 365 than it is actual functionality of the offering.
Ben, did you have one?
I'll throw one. Well, most of our clients with SharePoint platform, it really is an opportunity for, what does Microsoft call it? Third-party stuff? Something, yeah. So there's lots of third-party apps. Part of the problem we're seeing is that third-party apps, they're 365 counterparts, they're not peers. Workflow is a good example. Workflow engines in 365, the entire API hasn't been exposed yet through the workflow management farm. So like, say for example, Nintex on premises and Nintex in the cloud, they're not the same product. So if we've heavily written, we have heavily written code or a lot of forms or a lot of workflows out there, that'll prohibit us from going 365 until we can get those solutions updated in 365. So third-party products is a showstopper a lot for us.
And the vendors have got a bit clearer now on what they can and can't do. But
It was no offense, mate.
yeah,
Is mate what you say in Australia? Or is that just England? Where are you from? England?
I don't know. I forget.
I don't know, somewhere.
But yeah, the vendors will be a lot clearer on what they do on premises to what they'll do in the cloud. But there's a lot of work going on. The API gaps that Ben talks about, we have a whole user voice site where we're taking that feedback, so you can go and vote up what APIs you need.
I love
based on your
Microsoft, by the way,
customizations.
just to state.
It's okay.
Okay.
We all do.
We all get paid one way or the other.
They're moderating each other now. All right, so
There's one there, AC.
I'm gonna break my rule, and for Reuven, I'll give you my two showstoppers. One is to pile on what they were saying is around political/regulatory things where it's just simply a cloud issue where you can't take it out. Like there was like an oil and gas company who is doing stuff inside of a country that has rules that say the data cannot leave our soil, and if there's no data center there, then that would be a showstopper. Same thing for like financial services and with like regulation on where the data could or could not reside. The other big showstopper that I see is around the publishing or the web content management space and wanting to use that for an internet-facing site. It's just simply not possible to do it. There's no way to flip it on. You'd have to argue too, would you want that to be in Office 365, a .com like that, or would you want to maintain that yourself? So.
There's more coming on WCM soonish as well.
Soonish?
Q1?
Is that like before your 6 months are up, or is that after?
Alluding and discussions and announcements. That's all I can say right now. Otherwise, Mark Cashman would shoot me with a laser too.
So is on-prem going away?
Is on-premise going away?
Let me take that.
Why don't you do the company line first?
So, Bill Bear again owns SharePoint Server. He's been working for since I've been there plus on the future in terms of what's happening, what's coming in, and what won't make it for whatever architectural reasons. There's stuff that we're building in the cloud that just won't make sense to run on-prem. But with those announcements will be coming out within, I'm going to say within this next 6 months. We've already announced that there'll be a next major version of the product by the end of next year. And there's work going on right now with announcements, and the NDA guys will start hearing about this by the end, at least by the end of the year. But yes, there is absolutely another major version of SharePoint Server coming. We are not turning our backs away from the fact that a significant percentage of our customers are on SharePoint Server still. To be honest, a lot of them are still on 2010 and 2007. So, but that we understand that for whatever reason, the service might not be what they need, and we will continue to keep releasing those features. And it's evident if you look at the CUs and the service packs that Todd blogs about every time we ship one. We are pushing those new features through. So the APIs that Ben talked about, again, an area that I'm strong in. The create site collection APIs on the client side, that was shipped in Service Pack 1 a few weeks after it was shipped into the service. So it's not like we're ignoring it and it's just sitting there stagnant. We are making sure that as much as we can gets moved into that, and you'll see when the announcements come out that there's a lot of serious thought going into how we make sure that we continue to rev on that SharePoint server not as quickly as we do in the service. Like, it's getting pretty scary how quickly things come out. It's making my job exceptionally hard to keep up with everything that's coming. And I'm sure everyone else here too. But the server notion is that, on-premises guys aren't going to be wanting us sitting pushing updates every week. And that's kind of the benefit of the service, is that's been done for you. So we aren't going to change that rhythm. It's that 3-year cycle, and that's why we say the end of next year, because that would be that 3-year cycle of the same cycle that happened between 2007 and 2010 and 2010 and 2013. But yes, we're actively working on that, and there will be some stuff definitely by that new Microsoft conference in May in Chicago.
Kind of hard for that kind of a question to be answered by the rest of the panel, but anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah.
Todd's going to speak for Microsoft.
Yeah. Everything that guy just said is crap. No. So no, Microsoft has been very clear that yes, next year there will be another version of SharePoint on-prem. So us on-prem guys, we've got at least one more. And then in a separate, so I can't remember when that was announced, but then at some other point, one of the higher up guys at Microsoft, who I believe was pressed a little harder, and I think he said something along the lines of they will continue to make on-prem versions as long as there's demand for it. Now, they get to decide what demand means, so the cards are kind of stacked in their favor. But yeah, I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Yeah. And that's why you'll see so much focus on the hybrid stuff. And I will say it's not been as quick, personally, for me in terms of how it's rolled out, but there's a lot of guidance that came out in the last 3 months around that hybrid scenario that will keep rolling. So, we're definitely focused on server only. We really want to try and get the hybrid story strong enough so that you feel like you can start to use the service, and then hopefully at the end of the day, move totally over onto the service. Yeah.
I have a question. It hasn't come up yet at work, but I know it's coming, and that's in regards to legal holds. I know when you're in the Exchange and interface within Office 365, it's very clear as to where the legal hold is. But on the SharePoint side, where is that, and how does that fall into play, as well as viewing the access logs as to who has and who has not seen or read particular documents inside Office 365?
I can take it, but someone else can if they know it.
Anybody know the answer?
It is there. Do you want to answer it? Yeah, he's
Ben?
I'll let Ben take it.
No, I thought it was there.
Yeah.
That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, so there's actually been some announcements in the last, and so for those of you who don't know, blogs.office.com is the place where we announce everything, and it's a steady stream of these new features coming through, and there were a lot of improvements to the e-discovery, which Ben mentioned earlier on actually, in that service that covers Exchange and SharePoint.
You got to have what, Plan 2, or you got to have A3, G3,
right,
whatever, or higher.
Yeah.
So it does matter on your version.
Yeah, so if you spin up a trial and you go into the admin experience, there's an e-discovery center there where you can see all that and configure it. In terms of the read logs, you can activate those audit logs for read, and they are available. But it's because of the nature of the service, it's not quite readily as accessible as maybe the server. They are there, but the reporting isn't as sophisticated or as extensible right now as what it is if you're on SharePoint server, where you can get at that raw data. A little bit like some of the other things you can do where you can poke around the ULS logs if you're on server. There are reports that will drive off that, but they're just not as sophisticated as what you will get on the server. But I believe there was a blog post within the last few weeks.
What was that? The blog URL again?
Blogs.office.com. If there's one site that you need to follow, it's that site. That's where all the teams are consolidated now to announcing everything.
If you also, and it's just to go with that blog site, that's one the two I look at. The other one's office.microsoft.com/roadmap.
Right.
The roadmap site constantly shows you the features, it shows you the quarters they're coming, and what features are released. The big problem there is they don't tell if it's October 1 or December 31st, but at least we know it's in the quarter.
Because we don't know.
Is that why?
Yeah.
At least you're honest.
Yeah, there's different windows. If it's in progress, we know it's going to be rolling out in the tenants. But the other stage is essentially it's within 0 to 3 months time frame. Yeah.
So 2 good sites.
Yep. There's nothing in the cancelled status yet. I think the program managers are really nervous to be that first program manager that ends up with a cancelled feature.
I was just going to add to that, the SPC 14 video on how Microsoft does e-discovery and legal was a great video and stuff on Channel 9, so check that out.
Cool.
What about the content types in a hybrid scenario with the managed metadata service?
Good question.
Take it. I know that.
Ruben?
Ruben? These two on the end.
No?
Ben? So one of the issues we have with the term stores is really GUID driven, unless you're from like Chicago and it's GUID. But since it is a GUID driven, you can't simply just create your term store on premises and then create a term store in the cloud, because if you have any code or anything that passes, it'll break. If you actually look up, we've got on Summit 7 blogs, look up Brian Laws. We've actually got a PowerShell script that will replicate your on-premises term store to 365 via remote PowerShell and also push the GUIDs. We run that in a really elegant way by creating a task inside a Windows server and run the PowerShell script once a week. Hopefully a vendor comes up with a solution for that.
I think there already is a few, if you go in the expo hall on Thursday.
Is there?
Yeah, I may have worked there.
Really? That'd be great if there was a better way. I'll take it. That's how we did it.
But yeah, that story, the taxonomy stuff, if you look on the roadmap, there isn't much around that right now. Don't read into that too much, but that's the scenario you're in right now.
Good evening, Michael Bergstrom from Pratt & Whitney. Question for folks who need form solutions. That's really loud. InfoPath, right? We heard we're not going to be doing that. What's the Microsoft good answer on what we should do next?
So there's also, before this panel goes, there's also a really good panel that's going to be at 10 o'clock on Thursday where Jennifer Mason, is that the one you're running? Or Lori? Lori's running, yeah. So there's Lori, Jennifer Mason, and other people. That'll be really good. There you go. That's good.
So I'll do the official fossil because I can't be in Lori's because I'm in the developer panel, so sorry. Essentially, at the SharePoint conference, obviously, you know, the big famous death march of InfoPath and the deprecation of the product that will be around and supported until 2024, 23, 24, 23. We're seeing a lot of customers continue to use InfoPath for the variety of reasons because it is still a very strong product. We're also seeing a lot of customers look at alternate vendor products that are on the market. And there's a list of them that we announced at the SharePoint conference from that perspective. The other thing we announced at the Future of Form, IW Forms, which was Sonia Kopchev, who's in my team at SPC, was that there was a few additional things we were looking at releasing, and one of those was Fossil, for lack of a better name for a product feature, which was essentially a new way of editing the out-of-the-box the forms experience that was available in SharePoint lists. We did say that we were going to ship that, and I forget officially what we announced on that, but it has slipped. So it isn't actually available yet. It is actively being worked on that team, and it will be available. Now, there are other things available, which the Access team are obviously shipping around Access services when it comes to forms too. So that's one alternative that's available to you, depending on what SKU of 365 you have. But there are other things that we aren't quite ready to talk about yet, which we'll hopefully be able to talk about probably at the May conference, which hopefully will kind of start to drive that line on where we think you should be moving after, you know, is starting the plan of maybe something as sophisticated as InfoPath, because forms on SharePoint lists is not going to give you everything that InfoPath is for sure, but it will cover that. I personally would say probably that 60% scenario, but there are a lot of things that InfoPath did, which it does get a pretty bad rep. And as a professional developer, I wasn't a big fan of InfoPath, and I know some of the people in the room aren't either. But there are a lot of people that love it, and so we didn't want to release anything early without making sure we had a lot of feedback from customers on what they loved about InfoPath, what they hated about it, and so that we didn't build something that didn't really resolve some of the issues with InfoPath. So just keep watching that space, but we're just not quite ready to talk about that yet. We'll be getting a Fossil update, but I don't know exactly when we'll be able to talk about that publicly.
Okay, so that's the Microsoft story on the form stuff. How do you other guys handle it today? I mean, there's obviously, you know, work being done, but how do you handle that challenge today? Reuben, how do you handle that with your customers?
Really what Jeremy said, which is you evaluate the requirement, and it can be using third-party apps. It's continuing to use InfoPath, and potentially waiting to see what comes next. So you need to check the requirement, see where you're at, see how long you can wait, how much you can spend. You know, all of these factors come into play together. In the short term, InfoPath is the option, or third-party tools.
Jeff, do you have anything that you throw in? Like, what do you do in that situation?
For the customer, I'm not too big an InfoPath personally, but for the customers that do actually have it, I think you have to look at, again, requirements. What do you need for the job? I mean, I still have clients that run, AS400 mainframes from back in the 80s, and those are still kicking around. So, if 2010 works for you and InfoPath works for you, you don't need to upgrade, unless you're just chasing new features that you must have. But you can find other ways around that too. So you don't always have to go to the latest and greatest for something. And if InfoPath is working for you and that's how your business runs, then you can still do that.
Of course, one follow-up: you can always custom develop a solution.
Right.
The standard web forms kind of stuff. So
Sorry,
I think.
Just to add to that as well, if you do the custom dev, the app model is actually a pretty good place to do that and use SharePoint as a storage for the forms. And we are seeing a lot of enterprise customers kind of push down that way where the data store is in SharePoint, but the UI of the forms is just kind of grabbing those common controls off the web, whether it's Telerik, Infragistics, or what have you, to build those forms and have those nice controls that your users expect. And it allows you to get that mobile-friendly drive. But as I say, there's a lot of vendors in that expo hall when it opens tomorrow that, if you mention the word forms, they're going to be handing you out freebies and swag and stuff too.
I think there was also a session this week that's on doing stuff like alternate to InfoPath.
I think there is.
I thought it was Mark Rackley. I saw him in here
Probably
a minute ago, but I'm not sure.
I use Notepad for everything, so.
I think we have time for one more question. I think this goes till 6:30. So I think we have time for maybe one more question. Oh, yes, sir.
With cross-site publishing, what are the challenges working in this hybrid model, especially when it comes to catalogs or custom properties? It'd be more in relation to also having a QA site that would back up your production farm.
I can take it.
Go right ahead.
So, Andrew picked up on the WCM, and forgive me for forgetting that one, but the WCM story in the 365 is not really designed, nearly Mark, sorry, just Mark's nearly fell over. It's not really designed to be used for a full-fledged internet-facing site. It's not, like the anonymous story. It's very much for the SMB level publishing sites. And so a lot of the publishing features haven't been pushed into Office 365. So some of the ones that have made it recently is the content by search website, search web part, which wasn't originally in the service and got rolled out once we realized that we could scale it appropriately, because it is a very powerful web part to use from a portals perspective. And I talk more about portals from an intranet perspective. One of the things that I would have to check, but I'm pretty sure from a content publishing perspective, the Prime APIs are either not in there or not the entire set are in there. I believe it's not in there at all.
Two packages of WSP. That's
right.
It's all dodgy.
Yeah, but it's not a scenario that we've focused a lot of effort on at the moment. Primarily because the publishing story is not something is our major focus right now. There are, again, I say with the vendor thing again, but there are vendors in the hall that do have that replication technology that can do this. But I would, I would say with caution that is a scenario that isn't highly recommended.
For cross-site publishing, could you name those vendors that have that tool?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Cross-site publishing, could you name those vendors?
Yes.
Maybe after the panel.
Well, hang on, I just have to think 5 seconds, so because if I miss one, someone's going to come and chase me down later on. So. Right. So AvePoint has got the DocAv suite, which has replication. Metalogix has, and I always forget the name of their product.
But it does do cross-site publishing.
It will, but it doesn't use the Prime APIs, which was purposely built to shift between staging and production. Both those products use the standard SP List, SP Web, and sorry for the IWs in the room, SP Web, SP List APIs. There's a specific API that handles the diffs and pushing content around in a specific way, which I believe isn't available in its entirety, and that's why they use the standard APIs. But yeah, they're the only two I know of. I know there is another one, and when we get throttled for it, it's like Iora or something.
They got bought by MedLogic.
Okay.
Oh no, Iora, yeah, they do.
Yeah, Iora as well, but I don't believe they're here.
Dell does it. So.
And Dell does replication as well. Okay, there you go. So
But
the usual suspects.
But it's not content deployment like you're
Right.
talking about. It's not the prime. But was that who wrote? Was that Richie way back?
Yeah. I think I'm going to use a Reuven line, which is the requirements of, sorry, Reuven, but the requirements of the scenario that you're after is specifically wouldn't be real time like what you'd expect from a staging production that you get with Prime. So it is something that's going to be, scheduled, and you have to work out how quickly it can do it, and kind of have windows around letting that one push finish before you push another one. But those vendors will be able to guide you if you tell them the scenario on whether they're comfortable with doing it or not, because they've all been burnt by promising what they can do and then not being able to deliver. So they seem to be a bit more careful around what they can and can't do around that replication space now.
Cool.
All the curly questions.
Well, thank you guys very much. I'd like to thank everybody on the panel: Ben Curry, Jeff Rosky, Jeremy Thake, Todd Quinn, Reuven Gotts. So it's only day one of the conference, so we got 3 more full days of workshops and 3 more panels, one around forms, one around development, and one around the IT Pro side as well, all on Thursday at 10 o'clock. So make sure you come to those. I know some of these guys are involved in a lot of those as well, and hope you have a good evening and see you around the show.